love that. All awake in the morning, ready to be here. My name is Sharon Vaughters, and I'm honored to be the president of the Willis-Patterson Our Own Thing Chorale. Clapping for the crowd, I'm sure. This has been a labor of love and creativity from the start. It celebrates so many different things that we'll be talking about, including the 50th anniversary of the Willis-Patterson Our Own Thing Chorale. It's one of my honors in being president to be able to work in collaboration with some fine people and fine organizations. We have American Guild of Organists, and I'm not sure if we have some of the board here yet. We have the American Center for Church Music. We have First Congregational Church, who has given us this beautiful facility, kind of on a wish and a prayer that we'll be able to get this gathering of people. It's a first-time effort for us, and that means that, except for Dr. Patterson, who knows everyone in the world, some of these people are meeting for the very first time. My role is just really simple, to thank people who are here and who've been working on this for such a long period of time. First, I would like to recognize Dr. Tim Huth, who is running around helping. It was his inspiration, and I just learned as we were preparing down in the speaker's room that it's an idea that came from the link of words that we're using. Music in the Black Church, a kaleidoscope of colors. And that just brought the image forth that is so descriptive of the music that's from African American church traditions. It just kind of led us off on the right path. He's also our connection to the American Guild of Organists, as well as the American Center for Church Music. So I want to really thank him. If he's out there, maybe he can hear us applaud. Well, I'm thanking people from First Congregational Church, or people in the background who might not even be here today, but we have a lovely, lovely program book that was put together by the Our Own Thing Chorale Board, but produced by First Congregational Church. So we'll have a memory of this first-time event, which we hope to do in the future. So we want to thank Robbie Sawitsky and Carolina, who work in the office for this, for their work. It's also my understanding that this is a long tradition and a long history from way before I came to Ann Arbor in the 80s, that First Congregational Church was the home for Marilyn Mason and her organ students, and she was one, like Dr. Patterson, to provide inspiration for events and support those people who are studying music and performing music and exploring and wanting to be out in the community. So we remember her on this day as well, because we're, as Tim says, following in her footsteps. So Marilyn Mason, I do think we should clap separately for her too. Anybody here work with Marilyn Mason? Yeah, of course. Yeah, the legacy. Oh, yes. Oh, right, and Mr. Willis here is one of her students. So it's going on, and this church has been a great center. We'll be introducing our speakers more in depth in just a little bit, but I do want to thank Dr. Patterson for all his leadership in so many ways in the community. But he is a member of this church, but I suspect that he's a member of several other churches as well in Ann Arbor. And each church feels like he is their own. So I want to thank Dr. Patterson, and we're going to hear a little bit more about him. But I have really never met someone as encouraging, inspiring, as strong with the thumb in your back to get things done than Dr. Patterson. So I just want to thank him as well. And I'm just about done here. Next, I have an honor of inviting to the stage Alice McAllister Tillman, who since October 26th of 2022 has become the director of the Willis Patterson Our Own Thing Chorale. We are so excited to have her and her talents with us, and even these short few months, she's really put her own stamp on the organization, followed the legacies of those people who have gone before us, but also pointed us in a direction in the future that I think we're on a really strong path. So, Alice?
Thank you so much, Sharon, and welcome, you guys. That's why I'm here. I forgot to take this out. Hang on. I'm here to welcome you to this inaugural event. There, got it. And Sharon introduced me as Alice McAllister Tillman, the newly appointed music director for the Our Own Thing Chorale, and I know many of you in different capacities. Former parents. I taught here in the Ann Arbor Public Schools for 16 years, the last 16 years of my career. So I'm looking out and seeing you, and I'm looking out at chorale members. And when I say chorale members, I mean the Our Own Thing chorale members and the Brazil Dinar chorale members, folks that I have performed with for many, many years. And those folks who are closest to you and closest to me, and I consider you all family. So my job is to talk a little bit about the history of the Our Own Thing Chorale, and I'd like to start with the full name, the Willis C. Patterson Our Own Thing Chorale, and it was established in 1969. It's named for the founder, Willis C. Patterson, who is the emeritus director for the chorale, and a native Ann Arborite. He was the University of Michigan School of Music Dean of Undergraduate Studies for about 20 years, and my voice professor, and I'm sure there are so many in this room who could wave their hands to say that he was also a voice professor of theirs. So I'm so pleased to have been a part of his studio for all those years. The chorale is committed to preserving and performing traditional American spirituals as well as contemporary choral compositions written and or arranged by African American composers and musicians. The chorale also works to raise funds for the Our Own Thing instructional program. Founded in 1968, the instructional program provides free instruction in the arts, both vocal and instrumental, rental of music instruments, and scholarships to area youngsters who would otherwise be unable to afford the opportunity to study music. So the Our Own Thing Chorale is an outgrowth of the instructional program. Just as an aside, my first teaching job, excuse me, was that of a university student in the instructional program. So I kind of cut my teeth there, teaching voice and a bit of piano. So for over the past 46 years, about 1,000 middle and high school students have received the advantages of this program. The instructional program currently continues to work with students at all ability levels. These instructional offerings take place in the Community Church of God in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Several graduates have become recognized performers, teachers of the arts, and arts professionals at every level, both domestically and internationally. So that's a bit about the Our Own Thing Chorale. Today's program, let's talk a bit about what we will experience today. Music in the Black Church, a kaleidoscope of color, will cover topics including the Negro spiritual and sacred music from the oral tradition, the diversity and utility of music in the Black Church. We'll have a choral reading workshop where we will experience beautiful music provided to us by GIA Publishing Company. Use of organ in the Black Church, African American vocal solo repertoire, reflections on the future of music in the Black Church and beyond. So those are the wonderful topics that we will be engaged in today. Tomorrow's event will end with a concert, a collaborative concert between the Our Own Thing Chorale and the Brazil Dinar Chorale. We will come together and perform works by Wendell Whalum and John Work, and then we will end the concert with a performance of Robert Ray's Gospel Mass. And intertwined in that concert will also be Timothy Huth, who'll do an organ arrangement of Talk About a Child Who Do Love Jesus. Here's one. Carl Clendenning will offer God is a God by Wendell Whalum. And Lamar Willis. Tell me. Thank you. Richard Smallwood's, an arrangement of Richard Smallwood's Total Praise. So we're looking forward to all of the wonderful things that we will enjoy today, and capping it off with a wonderful afternoon of singing tomorrow here at 4 o'clock, First Congregational Church. Dr. Willis Patterson. Dr. Patterson is the foremost notable scholar and authority of African American art songs and has committed a lifetime to heritage projects to ensure this American art form is preserved and celebrated. In 1977, Patterson edited art songs by Black American composers that the New York Times described as a groundbreaking anthology. The second anthology of art songs was published in 2002. The 2018-2019 academic year marked the 50th anniversary of the racial integration of the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Willis C. Patterson was hired as a voice professor and the first Black voice professor in 1968. During his more than 30 years on faculty, including 20 years as associate dean, Dr. Patterson was a trailblazer, collecting and promoting the inclusion of music by African American composers in the tradition, vocal canon, and a successful advocate for the expansion of the School of Music, Theater, and Dance curriculum to reflect a wider range of composers and experiences, including a course for voice majors to study music by African American composers that is still taught today. Willis C. Patterson.
I'm assuming this mic is also hooked up, huh? Yes. Fine, good. I have been asked, or been granted, the privilege of introducing our distinguished panel. But before I do that, I want to offer my personal and the congregation's thanks to the Our Own Thing Executive Committee and Mr. Timothy Huth for making this possible. This has been a labor of love, but definitely a labor. But which we've all benefited from, and the benefits will only begin to be apparent when you hear this distinguished panel. And I want to here carry out my function of introducing the panel, which I ask the permission to do because I feel such a firm acquaintanceship with so many of them. And you'll understand that firmness when I start describing them. I wanted to, and I'm only going to add a little personal anecdotes to the descriptions that you had of the panelists in the program, beginning with the gentleman on my left. and he he was correct in making the sign of the crucifix. Jimmy Abington, Dr. James Abington, is currently serving as a guest professor at Harvard University. Is that right?
Yeah.
But I met Jimmy Abington at Atlanta, in Atlanta, Georgia, at Morehouse College some years ago, under the convenience and introduction of his major professor in Oregon, Dr. Wendell Whelan, a person whom many of the singers in the audience are very well acquainted with through his music. But Dr. Whelan was a very, very special character, and I won't go into some of the things that I could divulge to you about his specialness, because it'll take we'd get nothing else done. Jimmy Abington was an organ major at Morehouse, and I went down to Morehouse College years ago to do a concert at their invitation, and I think Abington was singing in the choir, were you not? In the accompanist for the glee club, the male glee club. Wendell Whelan grabbed hold of me and asked if there was any convenience or facility that I could exercise on his behalf to become a graduate student at the University of Michigan. I heard him play, and I said, absolutely, we'll do everything we can with my limited influence. And that worked out. Jimmy came, and his talents became so made aware of so many people in the area that he became the organist at the Hartford Memorial Baptist Church in Detroit, and it remained there for quite some time, to the detriment, in my perception, of his completing his doctoral studies, and to the detriment of his major professor, Dr. Wendell Whelan. He called me and said, Willis, can we get Mr. Abington back in the doctoral program? And I said, sure, if I can find him. This is getting a little too long, so I'll cut it short. But he finally finished after Marilyn Mason, bless her soul, becoming a major advocate of Dr. Abington. She would visit my office as associate dean about once every week, the subject matter of which was Dr. Abington. And she'd say, do you know anybody down at Hartford Memorial Baptist Church? I said, yes, I know several. But he's attached to that organ, and he loves the playing, the position that he occupies there. We finally got together and convinced him to finish his doctoral degree. And when he got his doctoral degree at the commencement, I may have participated in the commencement, but once he got his paper, I said, I'm sure that Wendell Whalum, who by then passed, is smiling beamingly to greet you, Jimmy Abington, as a member of the doctoral community. So that was a little late, too lengthy, and I will. I will continue on my left. Dr. Louise Toppin, one of my proudest associates, first as a doctoral student. She wasn't in my studio. She was in the studio of Dr. Shirley, George Shirley. But she spent a good deal of time during her doctoral work here assisting me with my publications and my radio broadcast. And she prepared notes, and she indescribable the thoroughness with which she carried out her functions. And I want to publicly thank her now for all that work. And she's now back gratefully on our faculty as a distinguished doctoral graduate and undergraduate teacher of some of the finest voice majors we have. Thank you. Is Dr. Uzzy Brown in the house? Oh, he's over there. He's abdicated his seat here. Dr. Uzzy Brown is on my right. He raised his hand. He came from also Morehouse College, a very distinguished scholar in several different areas of performance, and on piano and voice. He was a voice major here and studied with me, or I should say, I studied with him. And he has just now announced his retirement from a period of in excess of 20 years on the more 49, Jimmy tells me. Is that as a student and as a thing? Just faculty, 49. My goodness, you're. He is a distinguished scholar of composition. His words, his opus and compositions are numerous, too numerous for me to try to remember, and they span many disciplines of performance. He hailed, I used to make fun of his hometown, but I'm now, it's fallen victim of my slippery memory, so I can't call the name of it anymore. Cowpens, South Carolina, and he told me that first, and I said, "Come on, where are you from?" And he said, "Cowpens," and he said it rather proudly, and so proudly that I said, I better not crack a joke on that at all, for he's bigger fellow than me, and he might take exception to it. I want to go to my extreme right now, Mr. Willis. I'm sorry, just Lamar Willis, who I understand succeeded in my presence at the School of Music by about, I guess we missed each other. I retired in '99, and he tells me he received his degree in about 2006. Yeah. But he has established for himself a marvelous reputation as a wonderful choral director, singer, and entrepreneur in the musical arts in Detroit. Or is it in Detroit or Metro Detroit? Yes. And I'm just very happy to know of him because he studied with the fellow who succeeded me upon my retirement, Daniel Washington. On to now the handsome lady on my left, Pastor Portia Davis Mann. I have, she's of my memory is slipping again. The name of the church, this is ridiculous because I go there as often as I go here. Community Church of God in Ypsilanti. I have gathered a very, very strong impression of Pastor Mann as an energetic, no-nonsense, very vital and vibrant speaker and educator and singer and pianist and very strong advocate of music in the black church. And I'm so pleased that she's able to join us today. So I think that finishes my chore here to introduce people with an expeditious use of the time, for which I apologize. I've taken more time than I should have, but I'm very, very happy and fully pleased with the response of these people to be part of this gathering and participation on the panel. And when they finish, you will be even more proud than I. Now, is there an order that Dr. Brown is going to speak? Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I am indeed honored to be here, largely to be able to participate because of this wonderful gentleman who has just spoken, who has been so important in the whole of my career as a working musician. It brings back very fond memories being in this room for 3 years, at least. I sang right up there with the choir at First Congregational Church under the direction of Dr. Willis Patterson. Had the pleasure of working with him in gathering materials for that first anthology of art songs. And he has been so important as my mentor, a former president of the National Association of Negro Musicians, of which I would not have been so vibrantly interested in being engaged had it not been for the mentorship and leadership of Dr. Willis Patterson, who was my predecessor as president of that organization. And I need to say this, he is the catalyst for the beginning of the important research of this historical organization that was founded in 1919. Our first scholarship recipient was Marian Anderson, and the pleasure of being able to take up the gauntlet that he had begun with the research for the documentary history of that organization was one that I am still quite proud. And Dr. Patterson, I'm here certainly most particularly because of you, sir, because you have been an absolute gem, not only in terms of your impact in my life, but to the many, many hundreds of students who have come through, especially students of color at the University of Michigan. So kudos to you, sir, and I'm thankful to God that you are here to share this time with us. I also see a few of my former schoolmates. Elizabeth, good to see you, dear. And I'm very happy also to thank the gentleman who's assisting me back there, because when technology fails, which has happened with me on my laptop, it's good to have the confidence of someone running the PowerPoint, whom I'm sure will be a lot more successful than I have been this morning. So I will move forward in the interest of time. I am supposed to speak to you about the Negro spiritual and its impact on black music and on the black church and American culture. That is so important because it does permeate more than just what African Americans have done. It has impacted the music of the world. Some of the most vibrant research that was done on this music came from such researchers as Lucy McKim Garrison and the team of researchers that worked with her. You know, of course, of the wonderful collections that were done by Fisk University professors, and people don't realize this, but that was a legacy of Fisk associated professors who are both composers and researchers and librarians and scholars. And these are all in the form of the works, John W. Works certainly, and the work of R. Nathaniel Dett, and the list goes on. But it is important enough that it deserves this moment of time. What is the spiritual by definition? It is, as its name implies, a sacred song born of the individual spirit and contrived at some moments in time past when there was a particular need or occasion that could be aptly expressed in song. It is heritage vocal music, that is, music without identifiable ownership or a ready identifiable place, a point of origin, but extemporaneously evolved out of the experiences of a people seeking to express their innermost longings, their faith, hope, and thankfulness for grace bestowed on even the most downtrodden and oppressed of God's children. Next. What about the origin of the spiritual? The origin of the spiritual is really not known, as I said before. It is heritage music, it evolved. Certainly there were spirituals that were known to have come out of the 1700s and prolifically in the 1800s. And most researchers will steer away from discussions on any specific point of origin of in African American history. Most discussions regarding the origin of the spiritual are mostly musicological, except as the question may relate to their particular function in African American society. Indigenous idiomatic practices among African slaves and certain markers in history that point to the development of the religious movements within the United States collectively hint at possible influences on the emergence and the metamorphosis of the spiritual. And I can point to those, for example, clearly we would not have had the spirituals that come in the 19th century relative to getting on a train and get on board, little children, this train is bound for glory, if there were no trains. So we have a very good sense that this is mid to late 19th century that these kinds of spirituals evolved. Next. I mentioned the nature of Africanisms in communication. And what I mean by Africanisms, those characteristics of the Negro spiritual, of indeed African American music, and I sometimes say rather than African American, because we really weren't American. Initially, we were African slaves in America. That is the fair way to put this, because those powers that be refused to recognize any status of citizenship of people of color. But the most important and most valuable thing that they had was this bringing forth of those characteristics that had come from all parts of Africa, particularly West Africa, that were in fact idiomatically a part of the African experience. And so one of those things is their communication tools, the awareness of man's placement in the natural world. That is the regard for various physical elements of the natural world. Looking at wind, water, and fire. Such spirituals as fire, fire, Lord, fire, gonna burn up my soul. Or wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. And of the wind, hold the wind, don't let it blow. Metaphor and simile are part of those idiomatic expressions. Personification of animate and inanimate things. Next. Death's gonna lay his cold, icy hands on me. Death takes on here a personification. It becomes not something that is inanimate, but it becomes a part of the animated world. Stand still, Jordan. I can't stand still. Death takes on another characteristic here. Death come by my house. He didn't stay long. There's a significance to this, and my mother had a saying which came from her pastor that said, heaven is my home, but I ain't homesick yet. There ought to be something beyond just redemptive suffering that happens on this side of the grave. One of my former pastors used to laugh at those people who just lived on and said, well, you know, the Lord's gonna come around on Judgment Day and they're gonna have to round up folk and shoot you on Judgment Day because you're still gonna be here. So this kind of attitude of, you know, I'm gonna live always, I'm gonna live on, meant that death would not, in spite of the fact that it came to visit me. There's another side of that. Hall Johnson's original composition, Ain't Got Time to Die. I keep so busy praising my Jesus, and that is an original composition after the style of the spiritual. I ain't got time to die. It takes all of my time. Praise my Jesus. So you understand why it says death came by my house. He didn't stay long. Treatment of subjects related to the forces of nature, earth, sea, and sky, as themes in the sacred and secular songs of African Americans. Round about the mountain, and no rocks crying out for me. Of the sky, I'll fly away. Ride up in the chariot. Give me 2 wings to fly away. 2 wings to fly away to glory, and the world can't do me no harm. Of the sea, deep river, I stood on the banks of Jordan and the old ship of Zion. You can imagine how important these kinds of things in terms of this simile and metaphor were very important for the African slaves. If you picture the slave of the late 1700s in a dilemma where it was too far away from the beginning of the slavery to know anything other than slavery, and too far away from any serious talks about emancipation. So there was nothing but this dilemma of hopelessness, trapped in a circumstance that could only in some ways be satisfied by what I call our musical psychological counseling couch. We sang our way to a better place. Next. The vehicle of the narrative and storytelling as means of imparting history, vivid stories of epic and tragic events. Didn't no Pharaoh get lost? Listen to the lambs are crying. Didn't it rain? And I love the colorfulness of those narrative spirituals. It rained 40 days and 40 nights without stopping. Noah was kept praying and the rain kept dropping. And then that one line in Margaret Bond's setting of Didn't It Rain? She said, the Lord told Noah to take them 2 by 2, the ox, the fox, and the kangaroo. The wicked man, if he don't repent, just leave him there till my judgment. Those narrative stories that imparted biblical stories, and sometimes they were totally misconstrued, and in at the convenience and ingenuity of African slaves, they would sometimes fill in phrases where they didn't have any words. One of the most interesting spirituals to me is go where I send thee. I'm going to send them 6 by 6, 6 to the 6 that never got fixed. I'm going to send them 8 by 8. 8 was the 8 that stood at the gate. You don't know what gate, which 8, who are we talking about here? 4 was the folk come knocking at the door. It worked, it fitted into the scheme. And so it was a matter of musical convenience, just like using the words, I like to talk about this, the enclitic, which is an insertion of a syllable, where in fact the syllable didn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of the word itself, but it added to the rhythmic value. Sooner will be done with the trouble of the world. That's added in for rhythmic value, or taken out. Little David, play on your harp, hallelujah. Hallelujah doesn't work. Hallelujah, hallelujah. No, doesn't work. So it's a matter of musical convenience. They knew the biblical stories. What other kinds of stories? Identification of the plight of the African slave with biblical figures. Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? That's not the most important line. The important line, then why not every man? I am too one of God's creatures. And if he could do it for Daniel, he can do it for me. So it was more about them and their dilemma than just telling this biblical story of the victory of some biblical figures. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Go down Moses. Next. And then there was the admonition of behavior in the personal and spiritual life. Passive protests in some cases and reprimands for wicked behavior. It could pertain to individuals, people in the community, or it could pertain to their slavers. You better mind. You better mind. You got to give in the count at the judgment. You better mind. They may not have sung these deliberately to the faces of the slave owners, but they sang it within earshot, just a way of purging the hurt and the pain and the suffering. My Lord's gonna rule this wicked race. He's gonna raise a commission and they shall obey. I got shoes, you got shoes. All of God's children got shoes. When I get to heaven, I'm gonna put on my shoes. I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven. You can't tell me to go to the field. You can't tell me to stay down there near the cabins. You can't tell me that I can't go from town to town or even to see my own wife or children without a pass. No, in God's heaven, I'm free. And I am gonna walk all over God's heaven. But then there's another line. Here's the admonition. Heaven. Heaven. Everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Next. This idea of collectivism in African societies and vernacular expression. That is one voice expressing the sentiment of all. That collectivism is so important. I remember I've been to 8 different countries in Africa and stayed for various periods of time, but one of the most interesting things to me is an impromptu village celebration. Not planned, nobody is sort of as they are here, the organizer, the leader, the spearhead. It's just somebody with a drum and maybe a woman with a child on her back, and she starts to move, and then others will come up just passing by and get in and put in a few steps, and before you know it, you got, like it is, they say, like the crowd thing now, where you just, you pick up a cell phone now. But in these villages, they just collectively came together to celebrate as one. Well, that happens certainly in our music because when, for example, one thinks about one of these songs that's listed here, number 3, I'm Troubled. That is, as it is among each of these songs here, not only a sorrow song, but it's a song where I heard that song congregationally. One person leading the congregation. And you would hear somebody say, yes, Lord, I'm troubled. Well, they're not the lead. They may not have even come in when the song started, but they join in because the troubles of that individual become collectively the troubles of all. Congregations, free conjugations, free movement between first person and second person expressions, plural and singular. Temporal coexistence of the present, the past, and the future. Nothing here aiming at high grammar, simply stating the moment. Lord, how come me here? He got the eye on you. My God sitting in the kingdom, he got the eye on you. Not trying to be grammatically profound, to capture the emotion of the moment. But then in pieces like I'm Troubled, sorrow song, and others you will know, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. I could go on and on. But it says that if Jesus don't help me, I surely will die. Again, the psychological counseling couch. But there's another line in that spiritual that is the most important. It says, when burdened with troubles and labored with grief, I go to my Jesus to find relief. So it's answered the question. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, but it does not abandon optimism, because it says, if you get there before I do, tell all my friends I'm coming too. So it didn't just stop with, here's my dilemma. Here's the bad situation I'm in. Poll me, what am I gonna do? And they found solace quite often in that level of spiritualism that connected them with looking at a better day or a better thing. Thus the word victory and the true meaning of Jubilee, because it's either a present or future victory. This is next, spontaneous group singing in secular and religious music. In that great getting up morning, walk together, children, don't you get weary. Have you got good religion? Certainly, Lord. And these are also, which I'll mention in a minute, congregational singing was the first major vehicle of these songs. They were not solo opinings. They were not intellectual contemplations. It's functional music, as I said earlier. It satisfied some moment in time when there was a need for these kinds of expressions. Music as multimedia expression, combined with dance, drama, storytelling, costumes, visual spectacles, and a variety of instruments. I call this the pageantry of African American music. And so it's no surprise that we represent some of all of this in the black church. People didn't look at you strangely if you happened to raise a hand or if you happened to move. It was not considered a strange thing if, for example, somebody got up and decided they just wanted to walk a little bit. Or if somebody began in a shout, which is different, by the way, from secular dance, it used to be, because you didn't take your toes off the floor. I used to see my grandmother, who was out of the holiness church, and when she shouted, the feet never left the floor, but it was her shout. And you know, people would be like, oh, yeah, man, go ahead and get it out, Sister Brown, because this was a part of the entire body of expression. So all of this is a part of who we are as people of color. Next. To me, there were some important tools that sustained us through our music, and I call them the survival tools of slavery. It encompassed the spiritual in these ways. They represented creative ingenuity, a will to persevere, perhaps one of the most important. I'm going to live on in spite of. As that old saying goes, this is humorous and it's very secular, but one comedian said many years ago, listen, baby's kids, we don't die, we multiply. So you survive, you go on anyway in spite of it all. There is an African proverb, adaptability. We learn to adapt to conditions, and for those people, like some ignorant folk, like Kanye West, who said that if black people had thought of anything about themselves, they'd have gotten out slavery a long time ago. Well, listen, there's an African proverb that says, it is the young sapling who knows when to bend in the strong wind that grows to become a mighty oak. Expression from your old people. Son, bide your time. That means abide your time. Wait until what? Your change comes. Wait until it's an appropriate time. They weren't sitting around passively doing nothing. There were constant attempts at freeing themselves from the bondage and chains of slavery. Spiritual optimism. If I can't find solace here, I mentioned before, I'm going to look to a better day. I'm going to look to something that gives me hope and victory. I got a crown up into that kingdom. Ain't it that good news? So if I don't find it here, but then also redemption in your salvation. Oh, redeemed, redeemed. I'm washed in the blood of the Lamb. And so there was always something that represented that spiritual optimism that gave the hope to, as I say, as a part of our survival tools, live on. Next. What were the most common types? As I said before, the important thing to bear in mind is that most spirituals, these beautiful solo arrangements, many of which I have done, and by the way, this is an advertisement, it's a plug. Dr. Abington, I hope you don't mind, since he's editor of the African American Heritage Series, I hopefully will have a book coming forth of a collection of spirituals and inspirational songs that are solo songs, and they will emerge hopefully in the next few months. I'm excited about that. But, thank you. Those common types of delivery were done with group singing or congregational singing. And that involved somebody who was a precentor, they didn't call that, they were song leader, and the respondents. Now, why do I use the word precentor? Because we have to admit that there were some influences that happened to work and became palatable for the African slave, not because it was so new to them, but because it fit into the same kind of idiomatic expressions that they had carried with them from their Africanisms. Another thing that I have found in Africa, where there's group singing, there's usually a song leader who will begin the song, and it is responded to by the larger body, and people seem to know what it is. And sometimes there's no singer at all. It's just drums. They use the hourglass drum, which we call the talking drums. Africans say there are numerous drums that talk. That's just one. And the people who are non-African always refer to this drum. But the hourglass drum may carry the solo. Boom, 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 boom. And then all the rest of the drums coming in. Boom, 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 all this, you don't know. They know what they're saying. And it worked so well that slave owners were scared to death that slaves were communicating after they denied them the ability to freely use the same language or to talk to each other. They systematically separated some slaves so that they would not be able to verbally communicate. Why? Because it created an opportunity for them to steal away and create circumstances that led to insurrections. But they found a way anyway, not just in the States, in Haiti. They would communicate a message from one village to the other without anybody ever mumbling a word verbally, because it was passed on by way of the talking drum. What are these methods of responsorial singing? Question and answer, statement, affirmation, fragment, completion, statement, and reaction. What do we, just a quick example. One saying, oh, who was John? John. The responsorial body says, he was a writer. The angels came from heaven, John. Pick up your book now, John, and don't you write no more. That's a question answer. The question is, who was John? That's the answer. Statement and affirmation. I'm building me a home. The responsorial body says, I'm building me a home. Simply affirming what has been stated by the song leader. Fragment and completion. Dr. Abington knows this one well. Oh, would you be? He knows immediately. To answer his call. Now have you been? There we go. Fragment and what? Completion. And then there's another one. Statement and reaction. It's not a question and an answer. It's not a statement and affirmation. It's not a fragment and completion. It's just that's right. It's just a response. I mentioned before. Oh, when the saints have mercy, Lord. That's the response. Go march, have mercy, Lord. Turn in, have mercy, Lord. Oh, Lord, have mercy, Lord. When the saints have mercy, Lord. Go marching in, go marching in. That's the response. Have mercy, Lord. It's just a reaction. Not answering anything, not creating anything, but just this is the reaction to that statement. Next, functionality of African American music. Well, clearly our focus is on the spiritual and the relationship to sacred music in the Black church, but I just wanted to point out very quickly, there are numerous songs that do similar kinds of things in different experiences. As a matter of fact, I quite often refer to Dr. James Cone, who said that the blues was the voice of our spiritual in the secular world. It was the secular spiritual, and born out of the same kind of experiences. What? A functional music that spoke to the moment, that was also heritage folk music. That is, initially, these blues pieces, you couldn't find out who did them. You knew who might have first recorded them or who first sang them. And then there are blues compositions and gospel compositions. All of these are folk music type. But heritage folk music evolved at its inception out of the culture without authorship. What are some other kinds of songs that are influenced by this? Work songs, play songs, emotional venting songs such as the sorrow songs and the lament. You will know those. Not only, Lord, how come you here? Hall Johnson did a wonderful setting of a Negro lament that says, I cannot stay here by myself. Lord, I cannot stay here by myself. I'm going away. The Lord knows where. I cannot stay here by myself just to lament. Songs for holidays, celebrations, and religious rituals, such as births, deaths, social behavior, social commentary, education of the young, celebration of great leaders. Then there were the passive and active protest songs and the signal songs, very important. You invariably will hear different terms used for these signal songs. Those were also called double meaning or double entendre, using the French, and code songs. They were songs that may have had some ecclesiastical, some religious significance that dealt with that transcendental realm. But they also had a very existential meaning because they were songs that were sending signals for slaves to gather and find their way to escape. I gave you one example. This train is bound for glory. This train, clearly late 19th century. If I got my ticket, can I ride? Can I ride? Can I ride? Down here, Lord, waiting on you, and I can't do nothing till you come. The answer is, get on board, little children, get on board. You guys had a whole conversation. I know you're leaving. Can I go? If I got my ticket, can I ride? Down here, Lord, waiting on you. Can't do nothing till you come. Get on board, little children. There's room for many or more. Now, if they said, no, we ain't got no room, you better stay on, because it would be like the famous Harriet Tubman. She might pull a shotgun on you and say, I said I can't take anymore. That happened too. And the ones who were disobedient and unruly, she said, no, but baby, you don't want to find freedom. We're going to leave you right here. But these are the kinds of things that took place, and the signal songs were a part of that experience. Victory songs celebrating triumphs of various kinds. The Negro spiritual types, that's the next slide. Negro spiritual types. We mentioned sorrow songs and laments. They are the slow meditative songs that are more personal, more introspective. There are also the narrative and testimonial songs, like Witness, both narrative and testimonials. You know this. Oh Lord, what manner of man is this? All nations in him are blessed. All things are done by his will. He spoke to the sea and the sea stood still. Now, ain't that a witness for my Lord? That is your personal testimony. And it goes on to talk about Nicodemus. And it goes on to talk about Samson, giving you the stories. But then at the end says, now, ain't that a witness? And then what is the last line? That topic knows that. It says what? My soul is a witness. So all of this testimony and narrative builds up to that one proclamation. I'm a witness too. There were those spirituals that were narrative and testimony, caution songs, reprimands and admonitions to stay the course and to keep the faith. There were revival and camp meeting spirituals that evolved out of the 19th century as well, and there were the Jubilees. Now, a lot of groups, and you will say this, well, I don't know why. That name just caught on in the 19th century, so there were Jubilee quartets, Jubilee ensembles. Jubilee became a sort of catch-all. But in its inception, the word Jubilee comes from the word jubal, which was a ram's horn that was used, blown to celebrate victory. You know that. That was in the Jewish tradition. And anything that represented that celebration of victory. I got a crown up in that kingdom, man, of that good news, which I've mentioned before. Going to ride up in the kingdom sooner in the morning, and I hope I join the band. Victory songs. The next one is examples of spiritual types, referencing some spirituals. Lord, how come me here? I already mentioned that. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, which was a slow, meditative signal song type. Ride Up in the Chariot, I mentioned that already. He's got the whole world in his hand, testimonial song of evidence of faith and conviction. And Go Down, Moses, the biblical narrative that is also one, as I said before, that represents this signification of biblical characters that are parallel with the plight of the slaves' lives. I don't feel no ways tired. This is the next slide presentation. Farther along, blended spiritual arrangements where the spiritual meets the hymn and or meets gospel. So we're talking about pieces here where, as Dr. Abington will certainly know, some of the earliest of the gospelized songs were gospelized spirituals. You know, an accompaniment with Sweet Home one. You know that lovely setting by Wendell Whalen. But there was also one in the charismatic church, Sweet Home, with its active accompaniment. There was a congregational song. And it used to be sung in my hometown. Well, this is where the spiritual meets gospel. And we've always had this cross-pollination between our secular and sacred music and various forms or genres of music that belong to the same category, such as the spirituals and the gospels. A lot of the harmonic language that was used in the big band jazz area was translated into the gospels beginning in the 1960s. Even with the harmonies in Smallwood, some of them sound very close to harmonies used by Errol Garner and some others. Extended harmony, wonderful movements of this kind of thing. So this is where you have, in fact, compositions that merge where one genre of music joins another. Fix Me Jesus, slow and meditative. Balm and Gilead, also slow and meditative, is testimonial as evidence of faith and conviction. I'm going to move on, because in the interest of time, I think we probably need to advance this and move toward the end. So let me go ahead and conclude. This is the last of the slides that says, the sacred folk songs of the oral tradition are those rare gems which brought rays of hope and firm resolve to the lives of our noble predecessors who coined them. Because the need for that hope and firm resolve to do and to be better is still a relevant issue in the lives of African Americans. This magnificent music must be both preserved and practiced. The struggle continues because racism, poverty, disease, and moral decay continue. The complexities of a sometimes unfriendly world grow deeper. So must the deeper meaning and the ministry which lies within this music. As the years have progressed and the challenges of life's experiences have increased, the melodies of my childhood ring ever louder through the depth of my being. And I interject here, Dr. Patterson was right. I was very proud of cowpens because a lot of my experiences were still ones in that rural South Carolina town that extended from an oral experience. And so I say over and over again, I am because of and not in spite of. Lastly, in the words of Langston Hughes, from the Dream Keepers, the Negro speaks of rivers. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers, ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the river. Thank you.
Let me just jump back in here. Thank you so much for that presentation. What a way to kick us off. We have a lot of other expertise to share here, and we're asking Dr. Brown and Dr. Patterson to facilitate this panel. I don't know if you've decided who's going first. Perhaps Dr. Abington. I'll get you started and we'll watch the time.
I don't think I need the mic, or do I? Yeah, I do. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. It is indeed a privilege to be here, and Dr. Patterson has said everything that you need to hear about me and a lot you didn't need to know. And right up front, as I was sitting here, I am very, very excited about a revised and expanded edition of a book I did back in 2008, which is a collection of articles, essays, chapters, entitled Let the Church Sing On, Reflections on Black Sacred Music, actually with an introduction by Dr. Brown. Back in 2008, I dedicated this book to the pastor emeritus, Dr. Charles G. Adams, and the Hartford Memorial Baptist Church choirs and congregation, where I will be in the morning. But this has been revised and expanded up to date and finished in 2002. I have about 12 copies of this available for those of you who are interested in it. But I have signed this copy to you, Dr. Patterson. To Dr. Willis Patterson, my guardian, unswavering supporter, and friend who shepherded me across the U of M finish line. Wendell Whalum now rests. Celo de Gloria, forever grateful, Jimmy Abington. Thank you. Thank you. Richard Allen once said, "Our churches are where we dip our bodies in cool springs of hope, where we retain our wholeness and humanity despite the blows of death." The Black church, from its earliest existence as gatherings in slave quarters, bush harbors, and later praise houses, were known as invisible institutions. However, when Blacks began to establish their own churches, two distinct streams of religious traditions influenced the development of Black church music. The first stream represents that associated with and acquired from white Protestant denominations, such as Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians. The second stream represented that associated with those independently developed by Blacks, utilizing the concepts and practices retained from their West African heritage. Dr. Portia Molesby clarifies these two streams. The two streams are easily distinguished by worship styles, ideologies, and music practices. The musical repertoire of Black congregations that adhered to white Protestant denominations and liturgies were derived from official hymnals, which included psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. On the other hand, the repertoire of churches whose religious ideologies and practices were uniquely Black consist of Black folk spirituals and gospels, having derived from 1, West African musical traditions, 2, Black secular idioms such as blues, jazz, and ragtime, 3, original Black compositions, and 4, white Protestant psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, most specifically those by the composers Isaac Watts, John Newton, Charles Wesley, and of course Fannie J. Crosby. These two streams have influenced many of our churches from their early inception to even today. It's interesting that I would be here today having just finished a conference at Calvin University at a worship symposium where I was privileged to be on a panel with a British, with an African scholar and some other scholars looking at church music from Africa and the African diaspora. It was interesting to listen how each one of them talked about the uniqueness of each one of those traditions. Dr. Pauline Muir from London said, let me first say that there are blacks in London. She says, I know that's probably a surprise to you, but there really is. And that blacks in the UK don't just do African American gospel music. The other thing that was so important, as Dr. Jean Kidula from the University of Georgia, who is an ethnomusicologist, pointed out, I am here as a scholar from Kenya. I am not here as a scholar from Africa, the country. It is the continent. If we are going to talk about African music, we probably need a panel of about 10 or 15 scholars. Too often we reduce Africa as a country and begin to make unsupported generalizations about Africanisms in African American religious music. One of the things for sure, and as I just use this as an opening statement, that I think we see today is a lot of abandoning of tradition. Now, let me be very, very careful, and I must use one of my favorite quotes from Yaroslav Pelikan. Pelikan says of tradition that it is the living faith of the dead. Get that? Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. And unfortunately, it is traditionalism that has given tradition such a bad name. You know what traditionalism is. We've always done it this way. We've always had choir number 1 sing on first and third Sunday. We've always. Traditionalism, dead faith of the living. And we are now beginning to suffer from this in our churches because as a nation, we are becoming less church-centered. And of course, the most recent pandemic has provided for many congregants a way out of even being in attendance and being able to shop church. And many churches are now beginning to feel the pressure of commercialism, and they want to give people what they think they want. So many churches now, having abandoned the traditions, having abandoned the streams, having abandoned any identity of their own, there is a new sense of what is happening in church music. It was interesting in that panel, when we look at even churches who have had a rich tradition like the Church of God in Christ and the Holiness Church, where improvisation and many of these spirituals were just natural, those voices are now silent, and they now give way to the songs of Hillsong and Bethel and the CCLI top lists. And the older members of those congregations are now feeling very alienated in the churches that they grew up. Unfortunately, what we are replacing in our churches is a very sad and a very insufficient substitute. We have churches that have now decided we need to throw away the hymnal. Well, I would say throwing away those little theological miniatures that are theologically solid, that are biblically based, and that are culturally erased, unfortunately, in many instances, are being substituted for churches by music that at many conferences I have just referred to as 7-Elevens, and that's not the food chain. That's a song with 7 words that you sing 11 times, and then you modulate and sing those same 7 words 11 more times. And if you don't get the desired response, raise it up one more time and you modulate until eventually you come back around to the original key. But unfortunately, these are the substitutes for what is happening in our church today. And in many churches right here in this area, we don't even recognize the traditions that were established. And that gives us cause for concern.
Let me just insert here that you sounded very much like Wendell Whalum.
That's a good way of putting it, Dr. Patterson. I have so much respect for Dr. Abington, whom I've had the pleasure. I actually taught him, but also have had the pleasure over so many years of working very closely. And I think we got a good idea of some opinions that he holds, and he's consistent in that over the years. But I would like to hear from other members of the panel what your positions are on the state of affairs as it relates to music in the black church, particularly if there's a presence for some of the spirituals and older kinds of things that would have been done in the church. So, yeah. And so I'm going to ask, please, if each of you would just give me your take on that.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Lamar Willis, and it is an honor to be here. I really appreciate this. I am the minister of music at Plymouth United Church of Christ in Detroit, and I'm also a long-term music instructor and teacher in Southfield Public Schools, where I teach kindergarten through 8th grade general music education. And being in education and seeing children from 5 years old during the day, and then also having the experience of working with the church and seeing adults, we definitely have a problem in the church that I see, in the churches that I see when it comes to music. And what I want to do, and what I'm so hopeful about this opportunity, is to come up with some solutions to how we can start to bring back that tradition that Dr. Abington just eloquently spoke about. At my church, I am very adamant about keeping the spirituals and the anthems and the hymns and the hymnals in the church because it tells the story. It reminds us of where we are to go, and we need that. We can't just rely on the praise music only. Now, I do praise music too. I understand that there is a arena, I believe, where we need to be inclusive where we can. But we have to understand that we can't just lose the foundation that was strong. We have to have the foundation. I'm 41 years old, and when I was growing up, they called me the old young man. Because, well, matter of fact, my teacher, I call her my mother teacher, Mrs. Francesca Ampe. Yeah, give her a hand clap, please. Miss Ampe was very instrumental with me, and what I know is this: we need to make sure that we don't let the traditions die. And at my church, being a person who is, relatively young, I understand the importance of those traditions. I understand the importance of the hymns, because when you go through some trouble, some real trouble, you need a hymn. You need a word from God. And sometimes the 7-Eleven ain't just enough. The 7-Eleven is not just enough. We need something more than that. And so the traditions are so important. So I'm looking forward to learning sharing, growing from this process. And I'm just really, really grateful to be here today, and I thank you for that.
Amen. You can read my bibliography if you want to. We have forgotten that church is not a place for us to come and sit on pews. It is the hospital. It is where people who come, who have burdens, who are sick, who are challenged, come to a place where they can be revived, restored, and they can be set free. A hymn, if a pastor never preaches, can introduce you to salvation and save your soul by the fourth verse. I will give you an example. Praise and worship team went into the jailhouse with the pastor. It was a maximum security jail, 200 men, murderers, rapists, convicted. In the middle of that praise and worship, the lights went out. There were 2 guards in the room. Of course, the praise team went to screaming. But the pastor began to sing, Amazing Grace. Everything stood still. By the time the lights came back on, 120 men were on their knees, crying and saying, what do I need to do to experience what I just experienced in song, not in an introduction and your 3 points and the ending, but what I experienced in song. If we get rid of those traditions, because those songs were not birthed out of the top 20 or the top 10. They were birthed out of experience. It is well with my soul, as he wrote that song in the same place where he lost his children. When you are going through hell and you can say, peace, peace, wonderful peace, coming down from the Father above, sweep over my spirit. So I don't know about you, but church is about providing life. And if we lose our traditions to teach people that we come to church not to get, but to give, to be aware of that person that's sitting down the road from you that's crying, to be sensitive to that child that can't sit down that you may have to speak to, until we remember why we come to church, until we remember that our forefathers and our foremothers came to church because that was the only place that they could be free to express God the way they needed to express God. When they screamed and had the moaning because they needed to scream, then we will go back to our traditions of understanding that church is just the place to prepare us to go back out and to serve. So I'm not a politician, I'm a pastor. But the reason why we will continue to sing hymns is because if I never get to pulpit, somebody needed to be refreshed. Somebody needed to be restored. And that is the purpose of the church, for them to belong, for them to believe, and then for them to become.
Good morning. Before I answer that question, I have to say that it is such an honor to be here in this space. I was George Shirley, who is here, first doctoral student at Michigan 33 years ago. We came here together. And Jimmy said he was on his dissertation committee, so he was an important force for us. But of course, Dean Patterson was the inspiration for so much of what I am doing in my career today in terms of African American art song. The course he started in 1969 is the course I teach now this semester. I've been teaching it for the last 6 years since I came back to Michigan, African American art song. And I sang in the gospel mass of Robert Ray right here. I was a soloist before I graduated, so probably at least 30 years ago. I did sing here, and I was, like Professor Brown, I was a member of the choir. So this is home for me. I don't get to First Congregational in a lot very often, but I appreciate every opportunity I can to be here. Can you hold this? Sorry, my laptop just went to sleep again. Oh, now it's not responding. Okay. What I do is talk about African American art song, and I was asked to talk about that, but I will actually tie it into the question that we have and extend from Professor Brown that the opportunity for us in the church is to teach and to teach the history. As all of you have been saying, that we need to continue this legacy through the hymns. And one of the hymns that I'd like to actually point out to us was written by an African American. And it's in all your hymnals, but we don't often talk about it. In the hymnal, right in the book, the hymn in front of you, in your pews, hymn 394. I'm not gonna make you sing it, but it's "In Christ there is no east or west." And I just wanna read you the note that's at the bottom. Singer and composer Harry T. Burleigh studied at the National Conservatory of Music from 1892 to 1896. He is recognized as the first African American composer to employ spirituals in concert arrangements. This tune, thank you, is tiny, tiny print. I need larger print. This tune is named after the rector of St. George's Episcopal Church in New York City, where Burleigh served as baritone soloist for more than 50 years. That's the most complete explanation I've ever seen about this hymn. Most of the time we see it and just pass by it and don't realize that that's a part of that long legacy of spirituals. Harry Burleigh, with his work in spirituals, was not only important, was first important as being able to sing at that church. Even though that church was in New York, there was extreme racism. And he was not initially going to be hired to sing in the choir. It's actually J.P. Morgan, the same J.P. Morgan we all know, who was the person who made the final vote so that Harry Burleigh, for 50 years, could then sing in an could integrate the choir and sing as a part of it. That's a part of the history and legacy. If we aren't using our hymns, we don't know this. We are leaving this history behind, and he's not the only African American who appears in there. Not only is he important for his work with the choir, but he began to arrange spirituals in the middle part of his career. What was he doing at the beginning of his career? He wrote art songs starting with the 1894. An art song is a song with piano and voice accompaniment, written for the concert stage, or in their case, it might have been written for home use or smaller gatherings. But eventually, his works became important in the concert stage. And they were important not only for black people, but for whites, because people like John McCormick, a famous tenor of his day, used to regularly sing the works of this black man. He had lots of people, he was one of the most famous tenors. He had lots of people vying for his time and for his voice, but he chose to sing lots of Burleigh's works. So that extension from what Dr. Brown talked to us was that many of the elements that you saw in spirituals that were communal, as they were originally formed, appear in the solo versions. And as singers begin to have careers, they begin to demand that they can sing these songs. They're ready to reclaim. So it's reclaiming a history that was dying because of the circumstances. I think that for me personally, singing these hymns reminds me of the history. I take the time to read who wrote all these songs. What can I learn from these? How can we teach the next generation not only the importance of those that came before, but the fact that spirituals themselves have had an evolution, and that today's young people who are still inspired by spirituals, by the way, and all the African American composers, although they may not have been writing religious music, they have a spirituality to them. And the spiritual is still that source of inspiration, whether they were writing art songs or whether they were writing religious music. The spiritual is the foundation for all African American composers, but it's an important part of our musical history. And I hope for that reason we will never stop singing spirituals, never stop singing hymns. He's got the whole world in his hands in your hymnal. Let us break bread together. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? All of those are spirituals. They're from the tradition that was started by the enslaved Africans.
I am so really delighted to hear these diverse and yet similar positions of the panelists. And I want to move to another question, and Louise helped me to, in some way, foment this. It's something that I've been wanting to ask, and it has to do with teaching of these songs and spirituals to our young people and engagement of young people in our worship experiences. Even this morning, as I look around the room, I am compelled by the reality that a majority of our young people do not constitute this. I could be blunter about it, but they don't constitute the largest population of the gatherings where this kind of valuable information can be imparted. And I am very fortunate to have spent what is now, I'm in my 49th year at Morehouse College. It's been a very revealing experience in a lot of ways because I'm teaching African American men. I teach women from Spelman as well and Clark Atlanta University, but the majority population has been black men. And I submit that what a person is exposed to and bringing them into an arena where they can begin to understand and appreciate is one of the most important keys to salvation of our music, because we will all move on, and in some cases sooner than soon. And the question that I would pose, and I've had students say to me, Dr. Brown, I want to sing a spiritual. Because they hear other students and they hear other singers doing it, and I think the best way to establish this is to first put it before them and lead by example. But the next question that I would like to ask our panelists is, how do we become more actively engaged in galvanizing the attention first? Because you can't get them in the room. There's no platform to address these concerns. And holding on to them such that we're able to be more efficient in passing on these tremendous legacies that are a part of our survival tools. Anyone who, Dr. Abington?
Well, I guess since I sort of raised part of this, our institutions, certainly our universities, because as he says, he's teaching men, but I'm teaching predominantly white students and other ethnicities who are interested but scared to sing the spiritual because they don't think that they have a place in it, and trying to help them understand that this is American music and that it is intended for all of us. I teach, the dialect, of course, is the hardest piece, and I teach it like a language. And I teach them that spirituals are coming from a place not of that they are not to be shunned and shameful, but they are brilliant. They are created by brilliant people who created coded messages, who created an entire language, and so that there's a history that's worth studying. And once they've had an exposure with the spirituals, whether they sing in dialect or not, by the way, I don't force people to sing in dialect, but I do expose them to what it was about and what it means and what the history is about. So I think that I taught K through 12 first, and I introduced children to spirituals. I taught in Baltimore Public Schools. I taught in every university that I've taught. Black music, spirituals have been a part of the curriculum that I didn't make a big deal of it, but I actually included the repertoire as a part of it. So over my 33 years, I've exposed a lot of people to spirituals, and also I was a minister of music at a church, and they were regularly slipped in to our congregation work. I was in a Black Episcopal church most of my career. So I think that teaching on all levels, in all ways, using these songs that are always about power and hope and never about retribution is an important element.
I think it is extremely important that we teach our young people, but we also need to teach our older folks. I think there is an assumption that older folk know. We were talking about this in a class at Yale last week, and the students said, we probably don't want to give surveys to our congregations because it'll hurt our feelings. Because much of what we think they know, they really don't. We carry them through the liturgical seasons, but they don't know Advent from Lent or Epiphany from, a piece of Lent. I mean, it's, if you had to ask them to really articulate what that means, and you really go through, the very basic understanding of biblical, Christian Century they've done studies on this in terms of the literacy of congregations. So, as we're educating our children, we need to also educate our adults. See, while we're teaching vocal color, we need to also teach the conditions. While we're teaching style and sound, we need to teach the sorrows and suffering. And while we're teaching timbre and technique, we need to teach the trials and tribulations out of which these songs were formed. And God knows, when you talk about hymns and you talk about other kind of music, I'm discovering that when people don't first understand hymns as poetry, it's very likely that they may be less than impressed with the tunes. I mean, there's some tunes that are just musically not very appealing. They could be left unsung in some cases. They are not always the best marriages of tune and text. But if you at least start with the text and understand it and have some biblical or theological, you're broadening an understanding with young people that they begin to understand. One of the problems, and may I identify this is tough, but do you know what we have done in the Black church? And we may as well tell the truth and shame the devil. Many of you know this. Many of our churches, Baptist, Methodist, we've had choir number 1, senior choir number 1, senior choir number 2, the inspirational choir, the gospel choir, the men's chorus, the gospel choir that sings on fifth Sundays. We have segregated our congregations by genres of music. So many folk don't even come to church on the Sunday that they're not singing their style, or they're singing. And choir members only show up on the Sunday they're going to sing for the most part. You got a few Christians that come all, month, but most folk only show up to sing their music. And if they're being featured as the soloists. And all of a sudden they appear. And don't you think young people aren't sitting there checking this out if they're even in church? And here comes the other part of this that's unfortunate. In those choirs, I remember if you were in the senior choir, well, what does senior choir means? You have to be old to get in that choir. you must show ID of it being 65 at least. Now, why is that impressive to a 12, 13, 14, 16-year-old choir to sing with their grandmother? And then there's this elitism, because we sing anthems in spirituals. We don't sing that gospel. Same folk be at the club that Saturday night tearing up the rug. Have to put them out of last call, but they come to church in their pies. But then the real sad part about that is that these children are literally segregated. I remember this lady just didn't play well. I wasn't in school, but I knew she couldn't play. You know, I knew it was plunking then. I said, "Ooh, I don't want to play like that." And but she played for the senior choir. And as a young person, if you went up and even touched it, get off that piano. We weren't encouraged to play instruments. They fanned us away. If you look at a picture of a senior choir, they look like pit bulls. You know, they're sitting up there mad. Who wants to be a part of that? How are you going to say, is there one that would like to? No, we're headed to the door. So we've not been hospitable. We've not tried to get, I don't want these young people coming in here taking all the solos. Several years ago, when I was the co-director of music at the Hampton University Conference, I made an attempt to start trying to bring younger people, college students, to the Hampton Conference, because the youth department at Hampton was between 60 and 72. So we started bringing these students in, and these young people coming from colleges who had beautiful voices, and guess what? We were giving them the solos. Or them old divas and divettes. They don't want us no more. Now, they came because we begged them to come. And then we got there and then treated them like they were doing something else. A wonderful example, and I'm going to close, but I think take this and really deal with it. Now, we say, well, in the church, this is God's church. We serving God. This ain't the conservatory or the stage. All right, well, I'm glad you mentioned that we're serving God and the church, and that, ideally as Christians, we ought to know the Bible. So you just help open up at least the book of Numbers, Old Testament. If you know anything about Levites had a lot of restrictions. Those were the singers. First of all, you just didn't go to Levite rehearsal and said, "I've come to join." No, you had to be born into that. You had to be skilled, and you had to do so. You had to be prepared to serve in the Levitical service. And the book of Numbers, I didn't write it. Numbers 8, I wasn't born. In the 8th chapter of Numbers, 25 to 26. Moses tells them that you are to serve for a certain period, and then you are to serve no more. You are to go into the temple and do something else. It didn't say get mad and go home and swell up like a blowfish. It just said go into the temple and do other things, which meant that there had to be a constant replenishing of young people. We aren't replenishing our folks. We don't even make it appealing to them. I was, about 3 years ago, I was out at the Mormon Tabernacle Church, Mac Wilbur, good buddy. And I was sitting there, I said, "Mac, what, the choir, the sound?" And he started laughing. He said, "What are you hearing? I said, "Well, I'm seeing and hearing." He said, "Yes, we had to make some adjustments of the ages of who we accept. We now accept people into the tabernacle choir who are 25. But then we had to also cut down the top out age. And so I think it's down to 60 maybe, 60. I happen to be sitting next to a ear, nose, and throat specialist. He says, "I was in the choir, but, I had to graduate, and so he said, but my wife is up there. She's playing in the orchestra. You see that she's playing. He said, yes. I said, "So what do you do now?" He says, "I'm one of 3 specialists for the choir. I volunteer my service to make sure members of the choir are vocally fit. But he wasn't sitting there swole up mad, put me out the choir. Said I was old. He had a new role and was celebrating the 25 and others. If we really want young people, do we really want young people? Or do we just want young people to be like us? I remember a lady in my church, we want more of the Spelman students in Morehouse like they were back in 1881 when they used to come over. And I said, no, you want them to come over and be just like you. And that's dangerous.
The relationship for a young person to be in the choir does not start in the invitation for you to come to choir rehearsal. The relationship for a young person in a choir starts for when you take your time and go to their school and say, hey, how are you doing? When you go to their house, when you meet them on their grounds and say, yeah, I'm willing to spend some time. Young people have no reason to come to church because adults don't even come to church anymore. And if they don't have any reason, if they have no connectiveness, if they have no source, and if they have no reason, they're not coming back. It doesn't have anything to do with just music. It's relations. And if we're not willing to take the time, and that's what I always tell people, the lazy boy chairs are named lazy boy chairs for a reason. And we retire and we think it's my time to sit. All the knowledge and experiences and the things that you've gone through that we have not taken the time to invest into those young people. I think it was in Joshua where when he was getting ready to go into the promised land, he said, we have a whole generation of people who knew not their God. And that's our fault. So if you want a choir, if you want people to come, if you want them to be involved, then that means that we in the lazy boy chairs and on the couches and that are coming to this will have to take this information and say, hey, I know you weren't there, but let me give you this book this gentleman just gave to me, and let's get together over lunch and let's talk about this book. Or, hey, I just heard something. This is music I haven't heard. Oh, I saw this young dude. He had some twists in his hair. He probably could sing. Let's go online and check out his church. If we're not willing to do this, we're just talking. Relationships take work. We want young people, it takes work. And our commitment should be to, yes, bring them to the knowledge of what those hymns say and make it relevant to them. Why do you need to be in church? Because it's rough out here. And I can give you something that's going to help you stand instead of getting kicked out, be able to function instead of not being functional. They're building more jails based on the statistics of our children who cannot read at 3rd grade. So at 3rd grade, they have already decided how many jails they will need because of that. So we have to be intentional if we want young people to come in. I don't do discipleship in church. I do discipleship at McDonald's or on the basketball court or in the alley. And they meet at 7-Eleven. In fact, that's where they meet to fight. They will call each other and text and say, we're going to fight at the 7-Eleven at the Sunoco. So if we want young people, then we have to be intentional about being young people, not being cool, not trying to talk their language, but very simply saying, I said to one gentleman, I need to hear your voice. I'm not trying to tell you anything. I need you to tell me how I go about getting your group of people back. Made some changes because I listened to his voice. So if we want young people back, if we want to teach them our traditionals, we have to be intentional.
Recently, this is what I've been doing to be intentional with what we're talking about. With the opportunity that I have to serve at my school and to be in front of children from the ages of 5 to 14 and being able to create a curriculum, because, ladies and gentlemen, I have to create my own curriculum. It's not there. National standards, okay. But I'm talking about a curriculum that speaks to the children that's in front of me, and that has the African and the diaspora and all of the things that we want to teach them embedded in it. I'm taking those children and letting them hear, experience what it is to sing a spiritual, what it is to sing art song. And I'm also letting them come in and say, show me your songs, and let me show you how this song is in that song. Let me show you the soul that is in that song and this song. We're not too far apart. And once you connect the idea with these children, they can't get enough of it. They want the soul. They need the soul. That's what's missing. Everyone wants to do a TikTok dance. It looks like robots, but they need a soul because they don't want to create their own thing. We need to get back to the soul. So what am I doing? I said, oh, what about this? What if the church could reach back and say, listen, how about you come by and sing with us? Let me help you. Let me introduce you to something. You're in the School of Music? Let me provide a little love token. Let's have a collaboration. Oh, wait, maybe I have a friend who's a professor who's about my age, some of the younger professors. Hey, let's talk. Instead of us having a pipeline to prison, let's have a pipeline to church. How about that? How about a pipeline to the choir? How about us creating these situations where we can show them the way and how to get here? This is what's happening right now. I decided a couple years ago that, yes, Dr. Abberton, we had years ago that the choir at the Plymouth was called the senior choir. And years ago, they made the wonderful decision to change the name to the Renaissance Choir, because they didn't want to be known as just the old folks. They want to be known as the rebirth. And yes, they sing spirituals and anthems and some gospels. But guess what? I got people from the ages of 10 all the way up to 70 singing together. You got grandmas singing together. You got mamas singing together. Daddy's singing together. Cousins singing together. That's what we need. And that is so true. I'm living this right now, actively in the ministry of music, and see it, that you have people who really feel and think that because a certain choir sings on a certain Sunday, that means they ain't got to come to church. And that we've created a situation of segregation in our own community and in our own church, where we need the whole body of Christ, to make this work. So going back to what my intention is that I'm going to link the educational system with that church system that I have, because that's what I have control over. And I know that what I do, and all of us up here, I just believe in a calling. We all been called to do something. My calling right here, I can see it right as plain as day. And you just said it. What's missing? Relevancy. The kids don't, and then the parents need it too. If I teach a child about their history and then they go back and their parent don't know nothing, we got a problem. So we need to be more intentional with that. So what I'm going to wrap it up, and I'll say this. With our churches, we need to involve the young people throughout all of the choir experiences and just the church, the church itself, just in what we do in the church. And also, I believe this, and this is my personal thought. As people in the church, we need to follow that book and live by it. Okay? And I'm saying that we're perfect, but we need to open the book up, the Bible, and we need to follow it. And then when we open up those hymnals, we need to read all the verses and sing all the verses and follow it. Because the children are not going to follow you when you playing. Children are honest. Children do not I have kindergartners and first grades can tell by a person whether they are a real person or a person who is just playing around. And as soon as you play around with a child, they'll never trust you again. So we have to be authentic, we have to be real, and we have to be intentional in what we do. And we can make this happen. But we got to stop playing games. We got to stop having divas. We got to stop having devos. We need to get together, and we need to bring in the young people, connect them, and show them that this is your music. This is yours. It's not their music. I got young kids right now, African Americans. I'll play a spiritual, and they say, "Oh, that's opera." What? Opera? Where's the stage? Where's the stage? Where's the costuming? Where's the storyline? Where's the opera? Because they only know the classical. They don't understand that classical singing is part of their tradition too. We have to teach them. And it's going to start here. So this panel, I'm encouraged. Thank you again for us having this, because this is what we need to do. Talk honest and truth about what we need to do to come to the solution to keep and to hold up the Black American experience of music in churches.
Amen. I'm so sorry that I do have to leave, but let me say what an honor it is to be on this panel, what an honor it is to know you, Doctor. You just do not know how much you've spoken into our lives. And I just want to say thank you for the invitation. I do have some meetings that I have to go. One thing I have learned that works, children love to eat. So if you, and they do not serve on Sunday on college campuses. You want to get a child to come to church? All you got to do is say, "Hey, after church, let's go eat." That's how you build a college campus on your church.
Thank you all so very much. I would be remiss. I know people are perhaps chafing at the bit to move on to whatever next things are, but it would be unfair to you. The panel has been talking to you and not dialoguing with you. And I would at least like to take a minute to ask if there are perhaps one or two questions that you may have of the panelists. Yes, ma'am, I see you. Well, I thank you for that, and you are of the same conviction that I am. I think any medium that can be used to reach out, and that's the most important thing. It's that outreach part, to connect in some way is extremely important, and what works is what we need to focus in on, and not keep replicating things that don't work, because we do a whole lot of things to draw in young people, and they will come one time and they say, well, nothing else, nothing to see here, and they're gone. So it has to be impacting. So thank you for that. And we have a very distinguished gentleman here that I have known more years than I can remember. Dr. Shirley, George Shirley, fantastic singer, superstar. Dr. Shirley, I'd like to hear from you.
First of all, thank you so much. Phenomenal panel. I'm here because of Willis Patterson. I came to this university at his invitation. This has been powerful. And one of the responses that came from the audience was profound, just in how they responded to what the pastor had to say. And it reminded me of the fact that many of the spirituals that are most moving are those that are vocalized, given voice to by the way she spoke, which was quiet, not loud, but quiet, making people listen and having the power in that quietness to touch the soul, the spirit. There is a fascination now in this world, in this country, and particularly with noise. The louder something is, then it's going to get the response. But there's something called the still small voice of God that unfortunately is increasingly disappearing from worship services. That the louder it is, the more exciting it is, rather than making people listen. And that still small voice touches the soul in a way that noise never will. And this is something I think that in our churches we need to embrace. The world is noisy, but to come into the sanctuary and hear something that is not noisy but profound is something that I think that we need to embrace in our worship services. And I thank you for saying what you said and singing the way you sang, because the response was, yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to have to end, but I'd like to just leave the last word to the man himself, Dr. Willis Patterson. You'd like to?
You know, all that is worth hearing has been said on the subjects, save for one. And I'm sitting here thinking, there's a problem that most church music experiences, but seldom recognizes. And I want to address this question to Mr. Abington, Dr. Abington, because he's associated with music publishing. Congregational singing is a profound part of the services, at least it was for me as a youngster. Attracted me to congregations, to churches, congregational singing. The problem that I want to speak to, though, is as I've grown older, I've noticed that the congregation is, at least part-wise, at a disadvantage. And I want to ask if the printers and publishers of music ever take into consideration the range of the melody of most hymns, which, when congregations join in singing, they participate in singing the melody. The melody is always, or almost always, too high for the male voices. Why not address that question in the printing of the music?
Thank you so much, Dr. Patterson, for that observation, just very critical observation. Publishers are now realizing that you will actually have to lower keys. If you will look in some of the more recently published hymnals, you will discover that they are many times transposed down a step because of that very reason. There are some early American hymnals where the hymn Holy, Holy, Holy was actually scored in E major. And I think now in a lot of hymnals you'll find it in D major, but that has really been an issue because you're absolutely right. And I'm so glad you mentioned congregational song. Publishing companies are really experiencing some challenges because hymnals, and I in this book that I did, I look at the last probably 15 years of hymnals that I know GIA has been involved in, including the most recent, the One Lord, One Faith, One Baptism, which came out in 2018. And we learned a lot about that. We had to think about keys while we were putting in new praise and worship songs, things that were accessible to the congregation. But what we're discovering now, hymnals are not selling, or if they are, they're on pads, iPads, but screens have almost taken over in many churches, and they don't even have notations. There are some that have at least the melody and the words, which are great, but it is a unique type of technology that does that. So if all you have words, you don't have a clue what the melody is. You're just expected to kind of learn it by ear. But certainly publishers are challenged by that because congregants don't do it, or if the melodies are jumping around all over the place or the rhythms are too easy. One of the things that people don't realize about praise and worship, there are equally as many criticisms of congregation and praise and worship for the very same reason. They said it's too high. You know, the team can handle it, but the congregation can't. And God forbid you turn off the mics, as the pastor was saying, and just listen to the congregation, there won't be anybody out there singing. But if you turn the mics up on 10, it'll feel like the church is shaking, but it's just the mics, you know, the people singing. But the melodies are going everywhere, and that's a real challenge. But one of the things that I made note of that is a consideration, the black church is not nearly as participatory in worship as it used to be. There was a time the congregation sang. And we have robbed the congregation of many of those opportunities to sing congregational music because the choir or the psalmist or someone else is singing it for them. So we're going to have to restore the congregation to a level of singing. And I want to say this, the spiritual as congregational song. As Dr. Shirley was just saying, there's a time when the whole congregation needs to sing softly. We just, at Calvin this week, one of the hymns in the session was Richard Smallwood's I Love the Lord. You know that I love the Lord, he heard my cry and pitied every groan. And we sang, I think there are two stanzas of it. We sang it, of course the audience sang 4-part harmony. And the last time we just hummed it and sang, and by the middle of the piece, I just stopped playing. And it was like almost 565 people singing a pianissimo, just humming, I love the Lord. But in my mind, I was saying, and pitied every groan. You know, in the black church, they say when you groan or you moan, the devil doesn't know what you're talking about. And when that happened, something transformed the whole place. And it was quiet. It was silence. It was that. But that's got to be restored to the congregation and accessible. And those who are in leadership, pastors and musicians, need to be trained to do it. Because in many cases, if pastors are being educated to only do what's popular to bring in a crowd or gimmicks, all of our conversation is in vain.
I think Ms. Waters is about ready to call this session to a beautiful end.
Thank you so much for all the discussion and the participation. And we've only just begun. The lunch will be available upstairs. You follow through this door. There's an elevator to the left, or you go straight up the stairs. RSVs were required, but we might have some spots available if you did not sign up, so check in at the desk for that. And the good news is that in this afternoon, we're going to be able to hear more from Mr. Willis, and as he demonstrates for us the use of the organ throughout the service, not just for the songs. And then we'll also be having a choral reading that hopefully you'll stay for, sponsored by GIA Publishing, and then also a mini recital by some students of Dr. Toppin's, so that we can see the younger people here and invite them to sing for us and hopefully join us in the future. I just want to thank everyone. We're pretty well on time. We plan to have lunch at 12:15, so we'll be able to take time up there, but also continue the conversation. Ask each other questions, write down those questions, and we'll have time to answer that. So thank you very much.